And even in Atlantis of the legend, the night the seas rushed in, the drowning men still bellowed for their slaves. These lines are taken from Bertolt Brecht's magnificent poem, A Worker Reads History. These days, people associate Brecht with old red cartoons in which men in shiny top hats spit on the poor while wielding truncheon-sized cigars and flourishing gold watch chains across their distended bow-window waistcoats. And surely that epoch of ruling-class arrogance is in our past. Of course it is. But that doesn't mean that certain instincts and attitudes just evaporate. Here was the American president's mother, speaking grandly from Texas as the descendants of slaves took refuge in the Astrodome after the seas had rushed in upon their city. What I'm hearing, which is sort of scary, is they all want to stay in Texas. Everyone is so overwhelmed by the hospitality, and so many of the people in the arena here, were underprivileged anyway, so this is working very well for them. The White House was later to qualify these gorgeously phrased insults as personal observation, which indeed they were. The unmediated personal observation, that is, of a very much overprivileged person. They made a good fit with the performance of her son on his visit to the submerged region. Meeting two sisters who had only the clothes on their backs, the President of the United States directed them to a Salvation Army shelter down the road. The shelter itself, as an embarrassed aide was quick to whisper, had been swept away. But the point was the same, and contains the tone of the workhouse master down the ages. You appear to be distinctly poor and desperate. Do you not have a church basement to go to? Even at such critical moments, the faith-based initiative takes priority. The poor we have always with us, and the rich we have always with us too. Various benign arrangements will take care of the latter, while the former are better off on their knees and should pray as hard as they can. Perhaps a tract on intelligent design to go with that bowl of nourishing gruel. The subconscious mentality of the uncontrollably well-off was deftly caught by the novelist Joyce Carey, a chap, despite his name, who evolved the phrase tumbril remark to catch the essence of polite upper-class incredulity at the sheer inconvenience of having to put up with other people. My preferred example of the remark was once given by the late British Tory politician Julian Amery, who described an acquaintance of his, was it Lady Diana Cooper? There's an element of the apocryphal to some of these tales, as she waited under an umbrella outside the Dorchester Hotel in the 1930s and tapped her foot with impatience as the rolls was brought round to the front. Seizing his chance, a ragged man approached her without the courtesy of an introduction and announced that he had not eaten anything for 3 days. The outraged Lady Diana drew herself up. "Foolish man that you are," she instructed him. "You must try. If need be, you must force yourself." Wilde's Lady Bracknell could hardly have bettered this. Fortunately, in England, at any rate, education produces no effect whatsoever, she says. If it did, it would prove a serious danger to the upper classes and probably lead to acts of violence in Grosvenor Square. Yet it's easy to cull non-apocryphal tumbrilisms. Let me introduce George Orwell, who was writing a wartime diary in 1940 as London braced for the Blitz. He noted, from a letter from Lady Oxford to the Daily Telegraph on the subject of war economies, "Since most London houses are deserted, there is little entertaining. In any case, most people have to part with their cooks and live in hotels." Commenting on these perfectly wonderful uses of most, Orwell noted, "Apparently nothing will ever teach these people that the other 99% of the population exists." Lady Oxford, by the way, was the title of the great socialite and memoirist Margot Asquith, and the decade then just closing, the 1930s, was the scene of some splendid tumbril stuff. The diaries of Sir Henry Chips Channon provide an especially rich seam, as he describes toddling off to Savile Row to spend a king's ransom on socks and scarves before lunching at the German embassy with the divine Herr and Frau Ribbentrop, the dessert consisting on one occasion of lobster ice cream. What a nuisance, though, to have to step over dirty and unwholesome people as one makes one's rounds. "I see no point at all in being poor," the late Queen Mother is supposed to have said while being driven through some slum. These are the real thing. The failure of the upper crust and the cream of society to have the remotest glimmer of an idea of what life is like for others. The cream was described by Samuel Beckett as thick and rich, while nobody seems to know who defined the upper crust as a lot of crumbs held together by dough. Sometimes you can make an educated guess that the speaker is joking at his own expense. "I would not have the Times," remarked the late Duke of Devonshire in speaking of the decline of that newspaper, "in any of my houses." While making a documentary in Liverpool about how the other half lived, Aubrey Waugh addressed a group of proles and breezily told them that his own manor in Somerset probably cost more to heat than most of you people earn. Aubrey Waugh's father, Evelyn, was a tremendous snob in many ways, but was generally rather careful to avoid such direct class combat. Indeed, in his masterpiece Scoop, he gives a tumbril character to a radical type, Mr. Pappenhacker of the Daily Tuppence, who is rude to waiters at a restaurant that must be the Savoy Grill. He seems to be in a very bad temper, the shy William Booth observes of Pappenhacker to his host, Mr. Salter. Not really. He's always like that to waiters. You see, he's a communist. Most of the staff at the Tuppence are. They're university men, you see. Pappenhacker says that every time you are polite to a proletarian, you are helping to bolster up the capitalist system. He's very clever, of course, but he gets rather unpopular. In Kingsley Amos's Girl, 20, the radical chic Sir Roy Vanderveen tries for the same effect by plastering reactionary bumper stickers all over his limousine and driving as arrogantly as he can, honking the horn like Mr. Toad, and seeking to create resentment among lesser drivers and humble pedestrians. That didn't work. A tumbril remark doesn't work if it's conscious or deliberate, but what does work is an unmistakable, revealing, unfakeable reminder of how superiors really view inferiors. The wife of a British diplomat in Saigon in the 1960s, a certain lady so-and-so, once considered the surrounding carnage and observed soothingly that it wasn't as bad as it might look, since one has to bear in mind that Orientals had a different attitude to death. My friend, the poet and journalist James Fenton, noted as calmly as he dared that from this you could tell one thing for certain, namely that Lady So-and-so had a different attitude toward the death of Asians. For some reason, the Bush family excels at this kind of thing. I remember George Sr. having come in third, after Pat Robertson of all people, in a 1987 Iowa straw poll, being asked why his own supporters apparently hadn't bothered to turn out. "Oh well," he replied, "there was more to life than politics, and his sort of people were at their daughters' coming-out parties or teeing up at the golf course for that all-important last round." To be absolutely honest with you, I do not know to this day exactly what a coming-out party is, but it has a nice debutante Marie Antoinette ring to it when uttered amid the corn-infested fields and pig-strewn farms of Iowa. At a later stage, offended by the very idea that he lacked the common touch, George H.W. Bush put himself to the fatiguing effort of declaring in public his love for pork rinds and country music, and of guising himself in pleb-like clothing as if to the manor born. This is worse, in a way, because slumming on the part of the elite is a carefully graded insult to the intelligence, among other things. Oddly enough, and for all the Versailles teasing that she herself had to endure, Nancy Reagan had more class when she turned up in rags to sing the parodic second-hand clothes of the Gridiron Club and preempted the media tumbrils that had been rumbling around the Pennsylvania Avenue district in the early 1980s. "Because it turns on a sixpence, whatever that is," remarked the Armenian tycoon Nubar Gulbenkian when asked why he modelled his custom town car on a London taxi. One can be reasonably certain that this is a rich man's joke. But "the levees broke. Who knew they could do that?" is not funny for one thing, and doesn't demonstrate any sense of noblesse oblige either. It shows in a blinding flash what someone really thinks of you. It is not self-satirizing or deflecting. It is myopic and arrogant. The word tumbril is in our language and in our minds because of the imperishable passage in A Tale of Two Cities, where the carts, full of those same, now fallen, haggard courtiers, come grinding their way to the Place de la Révolution, and where Madame Defarge sits knitting with her fellow tricoteurs, coldly and contentedly marking each crashing slice of the blade. But for me, the most chilling mention is the very first one, where Dickens recalls a particularly hideous torture execution ordered by France's Christian pastors in defense of the old king's regime. It is likely enough that in the rough outhouses of some tillers of the heavy lands adjacent to Paris, there were, sheltered from the weather that very day, rude carts bespattered with rustic mire, snuffed about by pigs and roosted in by poultry, which the farmer, Death, had already set apart to be his tumbrils of the Revolution. You can feel it coming, like the stillness in the wind, before the hurricane begins. The reference to mire, incidentally, isn't Dickens' only euphemism. A tumbril really means a cart for the carrying away of excrement. Don't tempt me. Other expressions are in our language also. We still use the adjectives noble as positive and base as negative, terms that derive their original meaning from the Anglo-French feudal order, where every person knew their divinely ordained positions. We employ the word chivalrous to mean honourable and gallant, when all it denotes is a noble who owns a horse or horses and can thus ride over the unmounted, rather as if a specialist in Arabian equines was to be appointed the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and raise his eyebrows politely at the distasteful news that lesser breeds were sweltering in a dome. Another expression less commonly used, and there I go again with another instance of the same linguistic bias, is below the salt. This refers to the long table in the Baron's Hall, when seating was by social gradation all the way to the bottom, where sat the greasiest serfs and scullions. The precious condiment could not be passed below a certain place about halfway down. How we smile now to think of such primitive social and class prejudices. And then there came a day in New Orleans, a town named for a scion of French feudalism, when the salt water rose up and didn't just wet the people, but drowned them, and nobody was above that salt except those who could fly over it and look down de haut en bas, while a lot of lowly people were suddenly well below it. Whatever is that distant rumble that I dimly hear?
Let Them Eat Pork Rinds by Christopher Hitchens was abridged by Pete Nichols, read by Roger Allam and produced by Gordon House for Sweet Talk Productions.